goes. Uh-oh. But good to have John back. He's been gone a few weeks. Yeah. The other, on a side note, I don't know what day it was. Tammy and I were leaving Walmart, and Shirley pulled past, and she didn't see us, but we were. Well, then a couple days later, we was leaving Walmart, and John come in, so we saw him at the exact same spot. Yeah, we don't go together. Yeah. Anyway, so as I mentioned last week, and it's not really a huge deal, but just to understand that perhaps chapter 5 did not take place during the construction of the wall. So if it did, it's fine. If it doesn't, it's fine. But I bring that up only because when we read through this, I hope to bring out the points that I think that perhaps it was sometime after the wall was built, but nevertheless, we have it here in chapter 5 during the construction of the wall, so there is some debate. Again, it's not a huge deal theologically whether it is or isn't, but just I wanted to point that out. Keep in mind that the wall took 52 days to rebuild. So the problem here in chapter 5, I don't think would have reared its head during those 52 days, but perhaps it would have. And again, I don't know why I'm making a big deal out of it, I guess because just wanted to bring it up. Anyway, I will say that we talked last week about the height of the wall, and I looked that up, and once the wall was finished, the wall was about 15 feet high around the city. So last week in chapter 4, they were about halfway up, so that would have been 7.5 feet, which, that's taller than a door frame, so pretty good sized wall even at 7.5 feet. But nevertheless, the wall in chapter 4 was halfway, and the height was about 15 feet. Now there were different areas where the wall was higher, but generally speaking, it was 15 feet high. All right. Let's go through chapter 5. I don't think this will take very long through chapter 5, and we'll have a discussion along the way. So, okay, yeah, I'm ready. Here we go.
Nehemiah 5. And there was a great cry of the people and of their wives against their brethren the Jews. For there were that said, We, our sons, and our daughters are many. Therefore we take up corn for them, that we may eat and live. Some also there were that said, We have mortgaged our lands, vineyards, and houses, that we might buy corn because of the dearth. There were also that said, We have borrowed money for the king's tribute, and that upon our lands and vineyards. Yet now our flesh is as the flesh of our brethren, our children as their children. And lo, we bring into bondage our sons and our daughters to be servants, and some of our daughters are brought into bondage already. Neither is it in our power to redeem them, for other men have our lands and vineyards.
So we see here the financial trouble of the people of Jerusalem and of the surrounding areas, how there has been some type of drought, as it says there in verse 3. And so they don't have the corn or the means to feed their families. Not only that, but because they don't have a way to feed the families, they don't have any corn or grain or whatever to sell to make money. So we see here that they have mortgaged, in verse 3, mortgaged their lands, their vineyards, their houses. They've sold everything they have to try to stay afloat. And not only that, in verse 5, it talks about how that they have even given their children over to be bonded to borrow money against the children, and they're not even able to buy them back. The word redeem is to buy back. So they have sold their children in order to sustain their life, but they have no means of being able to go back and buy back their children. So we see the dire financial difficulties that these people are having. Now again, whether or not this is taking place in the 52 days of the wall building or after, really doesn't mean anything outside of the context that right now in chapter 5, there is great financial trouble amongst the people. And we'll find out later that it's even worse than what we've read so far in these first 5 verses. But they've sold everything they had, essentially, in order to just survive. And we'll find out here in just a little bit, they've even sold stuff in order to pay taxes. So it's not a very good situation. And the people are crying out, as it says there in verse 1, there's a great cry of the people. So these people are coming to Nehemiah. Now understand that Nehemiah went to Jerusalem to build the wall around the city, but he also served as their governor or their ruler in that area for some 12 or so years. which we will see later on in this chapter. And so Nehemiah not necessarily is just the construction foreman for the wall, but he's also their leader, their governmental leader sent from the king of Persia to be governor of this area in Judah. So they're coming to him because they've got this problem. More on that in just a little bit. But that's where we're at here in these first 5 verses, in these financial straits that are causing these people great outcries of desperation here. Verse number 6.
And I was very angry when I heard their cry and these words. Then I consulted with myself, and I rebuked the nobles and the rulers, and said unto them, Ye exact usury, every one of his brother. And I set a great assembly against them. And I said unto them, We, after our ability, have redeemed our brethren the Jews, which were sold unto the heathen. And will ye even sell your brethren, or shall they be sold unto us? Then held they their peace, and found nothing to answer.
So in verse 6, Nehemiah is very angry because of these words that he's hearing from the people. Verse 7, he consulted with himself. Now, what I take that to mean is he kind of took some time to think about what he was going to say here. We had a chief operator at work years ago that you'd ask him a question, and you would wonder if he ever even heard you. But he was always, now sometimes he would do this. So you knew he was thinking, but sometimes he'd just look at you. Sometimes perhaps he was looking at you because he thought the question was stupid. That was just the way the guy was. But nevertheless, it's like, did you hear me? But I think sometimes he was consulting to himself or trying to think of what answer to give. Now, he was very smart, and he knew his job, and he knew what he was talking about. But nevertheless, it was just kind of funny when you'd ask him a question. He would just kind of sit there for what seemed like an eternity, was probably only, just a few seconds. So, but anyway, Nehemiah takes in this information, and he begins to wonder about what he needs to say and how he needs to handle this. And he brings in the rulers or the nobles and the rulers there in verse 7, and he accuses them of exacting usury against their brethren. And there set a great assembly against them, talking about the rulers and the nobles. Now, with that in mind, I want us to go to Deuteronomy chapter 23. Genesis, Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers, Deuteronomy. Deuteronomy 23. Now, the word usury means interest, so you borrow money, you pay interest, but typically usury would be high interest or more than what it should be. And I'm not going to get into all the details, but understand that usury was high. But it says here in Deuteronomy 23:19, now this is the law of Moses to the people of Israel. And part of the law was given here in Deuteronomy 23:19. Thou shalt not lend upon usury to thy brethren, usury of money, usury of victuals, usury of anything that is lent upon usury. Unto a stranger thou mayest lend upon usury, but unto thy brother thou shalt not lend upon usury, that the Lord thy God may bless thee in all that thou settest thine hand to do in the land whither thou goest to possess it. So the law, it was against Jewish law, or it was against the law of God for Jews or Israelites to exact usury against their neighbor, their kinsman. So two Jews couldn't charge interest against each other. They could against somebody that was a heathen or somebody that wasn't a Jew, but not against brother to brother. But that's what we see here in chapter 5 of Leviticus. It's not only were their brothers, these rulers and nobles, charging them interest, they were charging them exorbitant interest where they couldn't even catch up. And that's part of the problem that we see here is these people aren't indebted to some foreign king, so to speak. They're indebted to their brethren. And that was against the law of Moses. So this is the reason why Nehemiah is angry toward the people and comes up with this demand that they change their ways, which we'll see here in just a few minutes. But it was against the law of Moses, or God, well, I might as well say it that way, for them to be charging their brethren interest on things that they've had to borrow. Yes, she is so cute. She's my best student. Anyway, verse number 9, yeah. So anyway, well, in verse 8, Nehemiah brings this charge against the nobles and the rulers, and it says they held their peace, and they didn't have anything to say. They didn't have an answer or an excuse. Verse 9.
Also I said, It is not good that ye do. Ought ye not to walk in the fear of our God because of the reproach of the heathen our enemies?
So I should have probably read that in the last group, but now these people that are doing this to their own brethren are giving God a bad name. The heathen can now point and say, well, look at what God's children are doing to each other. And it's not any different than Christians being against each other, or, you always see, I got to talk about my wife here a minute.
Uh-oh.
Well, she watches these crime shows all the time. We've got crime shows on, anyway. But a lot of these people that they feature, for better or worse, I don't know, but they talk about how they were involved in a church. And I'm just like, dang, what's going on here? But I don't know if it's deliberate that they choose these types of stories, but that type of stuff gives the church a bad name, because now we're all lumped into being murderers because this guy went to a Baptist church. And so, but in the same vein, all of God's children, so to speak, are bad people, because look at what this bad group of people are doing to their own brethren here in verse 9. You bring a reproach upon God. And we need to understand that we carry the name of the Lord everywhere we go. So if we do bad things, quote unquote, illegal activities, we give the Lord a bad name. So we need to understand that how we carry ourselves has a great influence on the outside world. And right here, Nehemiah is bringing that up to these rulers and nobles that are charging interest to their brethren. Verse 10.
I likewise, and my brethren, and my servants might exact of them money and corn. I pray you, let us leave off this usury. Restore, I pray you, to them, even this day, their lands, their vineyards, their oliveyards, and their houses, also the 100th part of the money, and of the corn, the wine, and the oil, that ye exact of them. Then said they, We will restore them, and will require nothing of them. So will we do as thou sayest. Then I called the priests, and took an oath of them, that they should do according to this promise.
So Nehemiah commands them to stop immediately, and lo and behold, they do. In verse 12, they're saying, we will restore them. We will require nothing of them. We will give back what we've taken. So Nehemiah calls the priests to come in so that they can all take an oath in front of each other for this promise that they've made to the crowd. So God must be working in this group, because all Nehemiah does is, man, they do it, and that just they don't even seem to fuss about it. They do it. And not only do they stop charging the interest, but they give back what they have taken wrongly. And they take an oath before the priests that they will give back and they will restore. So this is a big turning point here. Verse 13.
Also I shook my lap and said, So God shake out every man from his house, and from his labor, that performeth not this promise. Even thus be he shaken out and emptied. And all the congregation said, Amen, and praised the Lord. And the people did according to this promise.
So to shake his lap means kind of like what we do. We shake our hands of it. We're just done with it. That's kind of what he's doing, is shaking his garment, saying, I'm going to shake out, and every man we're going to shake out from this group of people, anybody that doesn't perform this oath that they've given in front of the whole assembly here. And, like what we do, we kind of wash our hands of things, so to speak. That's a metaphor. Verse 14, Nehemiah begins here to talk about himself, okay? And I think Nehemiah is talking about himself here as an example of how these other folks should be toward each other. Verse 14.
Moreover, from the time that I was appointed to be their governor in the land of Judah, from the 20th year even unto the 32nd year of Artaxerxes the king, that is, 12 years, I and my brethren have not eaten the bread of the governor.
So we will see here one of the reasons why people believe that this perhaps is not part of the 52 days that the wall is being built is because Nehemiah is mentioning that he's been governor for 12 years. Now, that could have been added later, perhaps Nehemiah wanted to go back and add this, that over the course of the 12 years he served as governor, he didn't take anything from anybody. So again, we don't really know exactly how this all played out, whether this was just part of the original narrative or whether Nehemiah added this at the postscript of his governorship. We don't know. But it does make me believe that perhaps this chapter 5 did not take place within that 52 days of that the wall was being built. Again, I'm probably making a bigger deal out of it than it needs to be, but just want you to know that it's a possibility. But he says there, from the time I was appointed governor for the 12 years, I didn't take anything from the governor. I didn't live off of the taxes of the people, which by rights he could have, because he was sent by the governor, or by the king, to be the governor of the people. And so it was well in the realm of possibility that he take tax money from them to support himself, but he didn't. More on that in just a moment here. Verse 15.
But the former governors that had been before me were chargeable unto the people, and had taken of them bread and wine, beside 40 shekels of silver. Yea, even their servants bare rule over the people. But so did not I, because of the fear of God.
So he mentions that other governors have taken tax money and were given bread and wine. And now the 40 shekels of silver, I don't know whether. Now I did figure that up. That's about 1 pound of silver, and today that's about $1,200. But I don't know if that meant 40 shekels a day that would have been his pay, or that was 40 shekels a year. That doesn't seem like much for a year, but I don't know. Times were different then, yes. But he does reference the fact that other governors, Zerubbabel and Ezra being former governors, took money from the governmental treasury to pay, to live off of. But Nehemiah says, I didn't. Now again, he's perhaps telling these people this as an example of how he has behaved, and so how they should behave. I don't necessarily believe Nehemiah is telling them this to toot his own horn, but to just be as an example. This is how I've conducted myself. But verse 16.
Yea, also I continued in the work of this wall, neither bought we any land, and all my servants were gathered thither unto the work.
So now verse 16 could reference the fact that, yes, the wall is continually being rebuilt here, but it also could be him saying that the wall's been completed, and he points to, I come here to build this wall, so to speak. But it says there he bought no land. He's just lived his life. Verse 17.
Moreover, there were at my table 150 of the Jews and rulers, beside those that came unto us from among the heathen that are about us. Now that which was prepared for me daily was 1 ox, and 6 choice sheep. Also fowls were prepared for me, and once in 10 days store of all sorts of wine. Yet for all this required not I the bread of the governor, because the bondage was heavy upon this people. Think upon me, my God, for good, according to all that I have done for this people.
Now he does mention here in verse 17 the goods that were given to him being governor, and that he was able to, verse 17 and 18, lists all these things that were given to him daily for his food and for his care. But he even shared that, because it says there that there were 150 people that would come and eat with him. And a lot of times what I studied was former governors would take what they did not eat or consume for themselves, they would take and sell to other people. But what Nehemiah is saying here is that he is allowing people to come in and eat with him this provision that has been given to him because of his role as governor. So, but he thinks there, verse 19, I thank my God, or think upon me, my God, for good, according to all the will I do have done for this people. So he's just praying that the Lord would bless him because of what he has been able to do for the people. Any comments or questions on chapter 5? Yeah, there you go. Yeah. All right. Nobody? Boy, that was 20 minutes. Not bad. Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, I wonder how much. Now this is going to be a stupid question. Please don't judge me. But is an ox cattle? Okay. Well, I'm only asking. You don't have to yell at me. Because I didn't even think about that till now. I don't even really know what an ox is. I know what oxen are. That's cattle, but is an ox? I don't know.
Ox is
Ox is
singular
one.
for oxen.
Yeah. Thanks, John. Yeah. It's a lot of meat. Yeah.
I won't let him live alone. It'll be okay.
I don't have dementia. Not oxes. All right. Well, sometimes when you're here in the spotlight, you just don't think correctly. I knew that. I just want to know if you guys knew. Thank you, Kay.
Well.
You haven't worked at Walmart. Yeah. All right, chapter 6. Now, unequivocally, chapter 6 is taking place during the 52 days that the wall is being rebuilt. We will also see in chapter 6 the wall completed. And it does mention, especially in verse 15, how many days it did take for them to rebuild the wall. Now, if you remember from prior chapters that Nehemiah and his crew have faced opposition, a lot of opposition, especially led by a man named Sanballat and Tobiah. These guys have been a thorn in their side from the time that Nehemiah showed up to Jerusalem to do this work. But as the work has progressed, the threats against Nehemiah and his people are becoming more and more. But as we talked about last week, remember, even in the sight of all these threats, the work continued. It just kept going. So with that being said, as all these things are being played out in chapter 6, understand that the work is still going on. Nehemiah does not tell them, or the people do not stop just because these threats are going on. All right, so verse 1 of chapter 6.
Nehemiah 6. Now it came to pass when Sanballat and Tobiah and Geshem the Arabian and the rest of our enemies heard that I had builded the wall, and that there was no breach left therein, though at that time I had not set up the doors upon the gates, that Sanballat and Geshem sent unto me, saying, Come, let us meet together in some one of the villages in the plain of Ono. But they thought to do me mischief.
So all these attacks and all these accusations against Nehemiah have failed, and so now they want to come and perhaps let's have a conference or some type of a meeting, and let's talk about this. Now again, Sanballat and Tobiah and Geshem, they didn't want the city of Jerusalem to have their wall built because, again, that's going to strengthen the city. It's going to make it a fortified city. It's going to make it a city that's hard to come into, hard to plunder, and they're against this because right now, without the wall, or well, before the wall was built, it was just open season for marauders to come in and take whatever they wanted because there was no protection. And they've threatened, they've sent in messengers saying they're going to kill the people. That's what we talked about last week. And now all of a sudden, let's just have a peace treaty. Let's go and meet in the plain of Ono, and let's go have a talk about this. Now, Ono is roughly in the city of Tel Aviv, today's Tel Aviv. It was about 20 miles or 30 miles to the northwest of Jerusalem. So it wasn't even like it was going to be outside of town. I mean, they wanted to go 3 or 4 days' journey away from the work to talk about this. Now, Nehemiah didn't want to talk to him whether they wanted to talk just on the outside of the gate or whether they wanted to go 40 miles away. He didn't have any business or any interest in talking to these guys. But that's the offer. Let's go to Ono and let's have a conference. But notice what Nehemiah says there at the end of verse 2. They thought to do me mischief. So while I'm out, they can come in and discourage the people or even kill the people. While I'm out, they could even kill me while I'm out on the highway. I ain't going nowhere, Nehemiah says. So Nehemiah is a sharp guy here, but again, he's not paying any attention to the naysayers. It's just the work just keeps going on. So essentially here, verse 3.
And I sent messengers unto them, saying, I am doing a great work, so that I cannot come down. Why should the work cease, whilst I leave it, and come down to you? Yet they sent unto me 4 times after this sort, and I answered them after the same manner.
So 4 times they send a message. Come on, Ono. That's the town they're going to. Come on, Nehemiah. Let's go out to Ono and let's have a talk about it. 4 times. I can imagine. I know how frustrated I would be, but I can't imagine how frustrated Nehemiah is at these 3 yahoos trying to cause all this trouble, not only for himself, but for all the people who have banded together to do this work of the Lord. And we don't really read, I don't think, of anybody that gave up on the work. I think they all just kept after it. Now, they have been discouraged, as we talked about last week, but even then, they kept after the work. And here's Nehemiah again. 4 times these guys have sent this message, let's go have a peace treaty. And he says, no. So, beginning in verse 5, they try another tactic. Verse 5.
Then sent Sanballat his servant unto me in like manner the 5th time, with an open letter in his hand, wherein was written, It is reported among the heathen, and Gashmu saith it, that thou and the Jews think to rebel, for which cause thou buildest the wall, that thou mayest be their king, according to these words. And thou hast also appointed prophets to preach of thee at Jerusalem, saying, There is a king in Judah, and now shall it be reported to the king according to these words. Come now, therefore, let us take counsel together.
I will say something about Sanballat. He's pretty persistent. But now he writes this letter, and he has it taken to Nehemiah, and it says, hey, now, there's been rumors that the reason you want to build this wall is because you're going to be their king, and these people of Jerusalem are going to rebel against the king of Persia. So what we want to do is meet with you somewhere, and we want to talk about this. Now, you know, I don't know. People's had rumors against you, you know, but at what point do you just say, you know what, you're an idiot? You're making up all this stuff. You want me to quit working. Now you've made up this story that I'm going to be a king. Who gave you that information? Where did that come from? And I can just imagine, just myself, how frustrated Nehemiah would be. Yeah. And in some ways, I'm kind of surprised, knowing how people were back then, especially, that Nehemiah just didn't go out and send somebody out there to just kill them. I mean, we've read throughout the Old Testament how people were just killed, you know. But Nehemiah just puts up with it. Now, he does ignore them, but he also is putting down these rumors. And but that's the rumor, or that's the lie that is being, not the rumor, but that's the lie that is now being told, is the reason Nehemiah is so interested in getting the wall put up was because he wants to be their king. Which, again, we know from what we've read so far, that's the furthest thing from the truth. Nehemiah wanted to rebuild the wall for the glory of God. And he had a blessing from the king of Persia to go do that. So, in verse 8, here is Nehemiah's reply to the letter that was sent full of lies here. Verse 8.
Then I sent unto him, saying, There are no such things done as thou sayest, but thou feignest them out of thine own heart. For they all made us afraid, saying, Their hand shall be weakened from the work, that it be not done. Now therefore, God, strengthen my hands.
So, there's no such thing. Go away. Get out. You're making this up on your own. But it does say there in verse 9 that it was making the people afraid. Now understand, they were afraid in chapter 4, but Nehemiah had an answer for that, and he appointed guardsmen and sentries in order to keep watch over the people while they worked. He also put them into working with their families so that the men would be more apt to fight and defend because they had their families close by. And so while the people kind of lost heart perhaps in chapter 4, Nehemiah got them going again. And here we see now in verse 9 that the people are weakened. But Nehemiah prays, "Oh God, strengthen my hands. Just let me keep after this." Now I think by this point, Nehemiah sees the finish line really soon, which we will see here in verse 15. But understand too, even though the finish line is close, Sanballat and Tobiah and these others are still causing problems. So here you can say, well, it says there in verse 6 or verse 1, the walls were done, but the gates weren't finished. So we see here that the work was almost done, and still yet Sanballat and Tobiah and Geshem are still after it, still trying to hinder the work, even though it's almost done. So they've called for the meeting here in verses 1 through 4. They've sent a letter about lies in verses 5 through 9. Now we've got one other thing we're going to do to try to get Nehemiah here, and that's in verse 10. This is, my Bible says this is by treachery here. Verse 10.
Afterward, I came unto the house of Shemaiah, the son of Delaiah, the son of Mehetabeel, who was shut up. And he said, Let us meet together in the house of God, within the temple, And let us shut the doors of the temple, for they will come to slay thee. Yea, in the night will they come to slay thee.
So here's Shemaiah, who was the son of a priest. And it says there that Nehemiah in verse 10 says that Nehemiah went to his house. Now we really don't know why he went to to Shemaiah's house. But now I do believe, unbeknownst to Nehemiah at this particular point, he doesn't know that Shemaiah is in on the treachery. He's been paid off by Sanballat to get Nehemiah to compromise. And it says there that he's been shut up. Apparently, we think what commentators thought was he was shut up. He's been in his house this whole time. He's not been out to work. He's not been out to help. He's not done anything to help the cause, partly because he was paid off by Sanballat. But for whatever reason, Nehemiah goes to his house. And Shemaiah offers or suggests that they go to the temple and close himself into the temple so that the people won't go in to get him. That's what's suggested there by Shemaiah in verse 10. Now, Nehemiah was not a priest. Nehemiah was not allowed to go in to where the priest could go in the temple. And so, not only would he go in and be in trouble with the Lord for doing something that was strictly forbidden by God, but then how's he ever going to come out if he goes in there? So, again, this trick by Shemaiah here to get Nehemiah to compromise was noticed by Nehemiah, and he essentially doesn't go in, which we'll see here. But understand that the suggestion for Nehemiah to go into the temple where the priest can go was completely against what God would have commanded. He was not allowed to go in there, and so he's not going to. And again, all this is set up by lies. I do believe that Nehemiah thinks that there's nobody going to come and kill him or come and take him. I think Nehemiah is smarter than that. But, I mean, as we've seen, he's been a very, very strong and powerful and astute man here. Verse 11.
And I said, should such a man as I flee? And who is there that, being as I am, would go into the temple to save his life? I will not go in.
I will not go
and
in.
I perceived that God had not sent him, but that he pronounced this prophecy against me. But Tobiah and Sanballat had hired him.
So Nehemiah could tell that he had been paid off by Sanballat and Tobiah to suggest that Nehemiah go into the temple. And it says there in verse 11, I'm not going in. I'm not allowed there. Verse 13.
Therefore was he hired, that I should be afraid, and do so in sin, and that they might have matter for an evil report, that they might reproach me. My God, think thou upon Tobiah and Sanballat according to these their works, and on the prophetess Noadiah and the rest of the prophets that would have put me in fear.
You notice how seemingly here, I think it was in verse 9. Yeah, verse 9. And here in verse 14, these are two prayers offered by Nehemiah at the end of these schemes against him. But now we don't know anything about this Noadiah, this lady prophetess, but apparently she was in on this whole scheme to get Nehemiah to compromise and to go into the temple. But he's asking God here in verse 14 to remember these people and what they've done, how they've fought against your man and your work, to put me in fear, it says there in verse 14. Man, to be a Nehemiah. I haven't asked, but anybody got anything before we move on? I'm about finished. This picture unfolds, and it's kind of easy to follow along in the narrative, so there's not much left up to question, but it is interesting just to see how, even toward the end here, these enemies of Nehemiah are continually after him, picking at him, trying to get him to compromise in some way. Now, here we are, verse 15. Since the time that the work started, which was August 1st of 445 BC, the wall is now completed, September 21st, 445. 52 days. And we see that here in verse 15.
The wall was finished in the 25th day of the month Elul, in 52 days. And it came to pass that when all our enemies heard thereof, And all the heathen that were about us saw these things. They were much cast down in their own eyes, for they perceived that this work was wrought of our God.
You notice here, the work's finished, their enemies hear about it, and now it says there that they're cast down, they're sad. It's like now they understand that this work was brought on by God, that this work was blessed by God. They were so consumed with their hatred toward Nehemiah and his project that they couldn't see that this was a work of God going on. And I think a lot of times, perhaps people that fight against the church or fight against things in the church or whatever are so blinded by their own worldview, so to speak, that they can't see God working. Now, again, that's people that don't know the Lord don't understand God's workings. But I think it's for us to understand that the people outside the church aren't ever going to understand what we're doing here. And so in some ways, we just need to ignore them and let them rage because we've got a work going on in the church. We're doing the Lord's work, and we shouldn't be sidetracked by people outside pointing at us and making fun of us or telling us how we're to live. It sure does seem to be funny that people that don't know the Lord have an easy time telling Christians how they are to live. Well, Jesus wouldn't do that. How do you know? You don't know him. Anyway, I better dial it back. Anyway, verse 17.
Moreover, in those days, the nobles of Judah sent many letters unto Tobiah, and the letters of Tobiah came unto them.
So we see here the nobles of Judah were in on it with Tobiah. They didn't want the city rebuilt. And they were exchanging letters back and forth about how to perhaps thwart this work. So all these people in high up, these nobles and rulers, were totally against what Nehemiah was doing here. Verse 18 with some closing words here by Nehemiah. Verse 18.
For there were many in Judah sworn unto him, because he was the son-in-law of Shecaniah the son of Arah, and his son Johanan had taken the daughter of Meshullam the son of Berechiah.
So these are just high up noble peoples in Judah. I'm not going to say they were religious by any means. I'm just saying that they were esteemed people, and they were all in on this treachery against Nehemiah and his work. They were all bought off, so to speak, by Sanballat and Tobiah and Geshem. Especially Tobiah. And Tobiah was married into this family. You see there that he was a son-in-law of Shecaniah, this Tobiah. So he was in on the inside workings of the nobles of Jerusalem here. And then verse 19.
Also they reported his good deeds before me, and uttered my words to him. And Tobiah sent letters to put me in fear.
All right, well, that's that on